In an unprecedented financial catastrophe, Elon Musk has just suffered a $1.4 trillion blow as his companies plummeted in value, sending Wall Street into a frenzy and shaking the foundations of the global economy. The sudden collapse was so massive that it triggered an emergency G7 summit, with world leaders scrambling to contain the fallout and prevent a full-blown economic crisis. But what caused this shocking downturn? And is the worst still yet to come for the world's most unpredictable billionaire? Let's dig in. Key events leading to the crash. The cascade of events leading to Elon Musk's $1.4 trillion crash began with a series of interconnected incidents that sent shockwaves through global markets. What initially appeared as isolated setbacks quickly snowballed into a perfect storm of financial disaster. In early March 2025, SpaceX's fourth Starship test flight ends in catastrophic failure when the spacecraft experiences a massive explosion during orbital re-entry. Unlike previous test flights where failures were considered part of the development process, this mission carries critical military and commercial payloads. The explosion scatters debris across the Pacific Ocean, triggering international maritime warnings and drawing intense regulatory scrutiny. The preliminary investigation indicates leaking fuel built up pressure in the cavity above the engine firewall, Musk tweets defensively. This is a temporary setback. However, the US Federal Aviation Administration immediately grounds all SpaceX flights pending a comprehensive safety review, halting dozens of scheduled launches and stranding billions in satellite assets on the ground. Simultaneously, Tesla faces its own existential crisis. Production at Tesla's new manufacturing facilities in Mexico and Indonesia comes to a grinding halt when critical battery components are found to contain dangerous structural defects. Initial reports suggest the defects could lead to spontaneous combustion in extreme temperature conditions. There has not been a single accident related to these components, Musk insists during an emergency investor call. However, whistleblower documents leaked to major news outlets reveal that Tesla executives, including Musk, were aware of the potential defects months earlier, but chose to continue production to meet aggressive delivery targets. The revelation triggers a massive recall affecting over 2.3 million vehicles worldwide. Tesla's stock immediately plummets 28% in a single trading session, erasing $240 billion in market value overnight. The recall costs are estimated at $18 billion, threatening Tesla's cash reserves. Adding fuel to the fire, a high-profile crash involving a Tesla Model S operating on autopilot claims the lives of 3 prominent tech executives in Silicon Valley. The vehicle fails to detect a construction barrier on Highway 101, the same location where Apple engineer Walter Huang died in a similar autopilot-related crash years earlier. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, launches an immediate investigation focusing on Musk's repeated claims about autopilot safety. There has not been one accident or injury since FSD beta launch, Musk had tweeted just weeks before the crash. Not one, not a single one. Families of the victims file a class action lawsuit against Tesla and personally name Musk as a defendant, citing his reckless misrepresentation of autopilot capabilities. The lawsuit seeks $10 billion in damages and triggers a separate SEC investigation into Musk's public statements about Tesla's self-driving technology. The combined effect of these events triggers a broader market sell-off. Institutional investors begin liquidating positions in all Musk-related ventures. SpaceX's private valuation collapses by 60% when major investors attempt to sell their stakes. The Boring Company and Neuralink face similar investor exoduses. The contagion spreads beyond Musk's companies to the broader tech sector and cryptocurrency markets. Bitcoin, which Tesla had invested in heavily, crashes 45% in value. The ripple effects destabilize several major hedge funds with significant exposure to Tesla and crypto assets, leading to margin calls and forced liquidations across global markets. By mid-April 2025, the total market value erased from Musk's empire and related investments reaches an unprecedented $1.4 trillion, representing the largest destruction of paper wealth tied to a single individual in financial history. With global markets teetering and systemic risks mounting, finance ministers from G7 nations convene an emergency summit to address the escalating crisis. But what does this massive financial fallout mean for Musk's most high-profile ventures like Tesla and SpaceX? How will these companies, already at the center of his empire, weather the storm? Impact on Tesla and SpaceX. The crash hit Elon Musk's companies like a storm nobody saw coming. Tesla, his electric car company, took the biggest blow. The company's stock, which is like a piece of ownership that people can buy, dropped by 45% in just 2 weeks. This means if someone had $100 worth of Tesla stock before, it would only be worth about $55 after the crash. Tesla's factories started having serious problems too. The Gigafactory in Shanghai, which is one of Tesla's biggest car-making plants, had to slow down production by 30%. Instead of making 1,000 cars each day, they could only make about 700. This happened because they couldn't get enough parts from suppliers who were also affected by the economic trouble. In Texas, where Tesla recently built another factory, things weren't any better. They had to pause the production of their Cybertruck, the futuristic-looking pickup truck that many customers had already paid deposits for. The company sent out emails explaining that deliveries would be delayed by at least 6 months, which made many customers upset. Tesla also had to let go of about 10% of its workers worldwide. This means around 10,000 people lost their jobs. The company explained they needed to cut costs to survive the difficult times ahead. SpaceX, Musk's rocket company, faced different challenges. While not publicly traded like Tesla, SpaceX still felt the effects. The company had to postpone 3 major satellite launches that were scheduled for the next month. These satellites were part of their Starlink project, which aims to provide internet to people all over the world. The crash also affected SpaceX's plans to send astronauts to the International Space Station. NASA, which partners with SpaceX for these missions, announced a 2-month delay for the next crew rotation. They wanted to make sure everything was stable before sending people into space. Investors who had put money into SpaceX privately started getting nervous too. The company's estimated value dropped from $150 billion to about $95 billion almost overnight. This made it harder for SpaceX to raise new money for their ambitious Mars mission plans. Musk himself lost a huge amount of money during this crash. Since he owns large portions of both companies, the drop in their value directly affected his personal wealth. In just 10 days, his net worth fell from $240 billion to around $115 billion. While he's still incredibly rich, this was the biggest loss of wealth ever recorded for one person in such a short time. The crash also revealed how connected these companies are to Musk himself. When he posted some controversial comments on social media during the crisis, Tesla's stock dropped even further. This showed how his personal actions can affect the companies he runs. Both companies had to make emergency changes to survive. Tesla announced they would focus only on their most profitable cars, putting newer models on hold. SpaceX shifted resources to government contracts, which were more stable than commercial launches during the economic uncertainty. Despite these challenges, both companies had some strengths that helped them weather the storm better than expected. Tesla had about $22 billion in cash reserves, which gave them a safety net. SpaceX had long-term contracts with NASA and the military that couldn't be easily canceled. As the dust settled, the question on everyone's mind was clear. With Musk's influence stretching across electric cars, space exploration, and renewable energy, how could world leaders ignore the ripple effects his company's collapse might have on the global economy? The G7 summit's emergency response. When Elon Musk's companies lost $1.4 trillion in value overnight, world leaders knew they had to act fast. Within 48 hours, the leaders of the G7 nations called for an emergency summit. The G7, which stands for Group of Seven, includes the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. These countries have some of the largest economies in the world. The emergency summit was set up at the historic Mont Saint-Michel in France. This medieval island abbey sits off the coast of Normandy and has hosted important meetings before. The summit was scheduled to last 3 days, starting on June 15th. Security was extremely tight, with Coast Guard vessels patrolling the waters around the island and no-fly zones established overhead. President Harris of the United States arrived first, followed quickly by Prime Minister Sunak from the UK. The other leaders came throughout the day, each with teams of economic advisors and technology experts. Unlike regular G7 meetings that are planned months in advance, this emergency gathering came together in just days, showing how serious the situation was. The main focus of the summit was clear: how to stop the economic bleeding caused by Musk's crash. When Tesla and SpaceX stocks plummeted, they took down other tech companies with them. This created a domino effect across global markets. Stock exchanges in New York, London, Tokyo, and Frankfurt all saw massive losses. The leaders needed to find ways to stabilize these markets before things got worse. years. Another key issue was the future of critical infrastructure that relied on Musk's companies. SpaceX's Starlink satellites provided internet to many remote areas and were used by military forces in several countries. Tesla's battery technology powered electrical grids in some regions. The G7 leaders needed plans to keep these systems running if the companies couldn't recover. The summit also addressed the growing public panic. In some cities, people were withdrawing money from banks and stocking up on supplies, worried about a repeat of the 2008 financial crisis. The G7 leaders wanted to send a clear message that governments were working together to prevent a global depression. Each country brought different concerns to the table. Japan worried about its heavy investments in Tesla's gigafactories. Germany feared for its auto industry, which was already struggling to compete with electric vehicles. The United States had national security concerns about SpaceX's government contracts. The summit set up 3 working groups. The first focused on immediate market stabilization, including possible government purchases of Tesla and SpaceX stocks to prop up their values. The second group worked on longer-term regulations for too-big-to-fail tech companies. The third developed contingency plans for taking over critical infrastructure if necessary. Finance ministers worked through the night on a joint statement to calm the markets. Central bank leaders joined by video conference to coordinate interest rate responses. Energy ministers mapped out plans to handle disruptions in battery supply chains. Agenda and priorities of the G7 summit. The leaders of the world's most powerful economies gathered to tackle the chaos caused by the collapse of Elon Musk's companies. The swift loss of $1.4 trillion had sent shockwaves through global stock markets, and now the G7 needed a solution. The first priority was to stabilize the economy. When such a massive amount of wealth evaporates, it affects everyone, from businesses to everyday citizens. The leaders discussed injecting capital into the banking systems to maintain stability and lowering interest rates temporarily to encourage spending. We must ensure that everyday people don't lose their savings or jobs because of the fallout from Musk's companies, said a leading official. Next, they turned to the issue of overseeing large tech companies. Musk's empire, which spanned industries from electric vehicles to space exploration, had grown so vast that when it faltered, it caused a domino effect. The G7 proposed new regulations on corporate debt and increased transparency around financial reporting to prevent such risks. One person shouldn't have so much control over technologies that millions of people depend on, argued another official. We need guardrails. Protecting critical technologies was another key topic. Musk's companies were responsible for major innovations, rockets used by governments, global internet infrastructure, and life-changing medical technology. The G7 discussed ensuring that these crucial systems wouldn't disappear if a company went bankrupt. International cooperation was essential. The leaders recognized that no single country could solve this crisis alone. They proposed creating a dedicated team of financial experts from all G7 nations to monitor developments and share information swiftly. This is a global problem that needs a global solution, said one prime minister. Public trust was also on the agenda. With people fearing for their jobs and savings, the G7 emphasized the importance of clear communication to avoid panic and provide reassurance. Energy security, too, was addressed. Tesla's influence in the green technology space meant that its struggles could hinder the shift to cleaner energy. The G7 proposed increasing support for other companies developing green solutions. Finally, the too-big-to-fail issue took center stage. Should governments intervene to save Musk's companies? The leaders debated the balance between allowing the market to correct itself and preventing catastrophic harm to the economy. We can't just bail out billionaires, said one president firmly, but we also can't let millions of workers suffer if these companies collapse completely. By the end of the meeting, the G7 had outlined a set of clear priorities: stabilize markets, create regulations for big tech, safeguard critical technologies, foster international cooperation, communicate openly with the public, support clean energy, and determine the right response to the too-big-to-fail dilemma. As they prepared to announce their plan, one question loomed: would these actions be enough to contain the damage from what some were already calling the Musk meltdown? What this could mean for the world? The emergency summit has set the stage for several possible futures, both for Elon Musk and the tech industry as a whole. One likely outcome is the introduction of new regulations for big tech companies. The G7 may propose laws limiting how much control a single individual can have over multiple major companies. This could force Musk to relinquish control of some of his businesses, and similar scrutiny may be applied to other tech giants like Amazon and Google. The stock market, despite government intervention, will take time to recover. Even with efforts to stabilize the situation, the massive loss of $1.4 trillion will leave a lasting impact. Investors who had stakes in Musk's companies could face prolonged losses, and this might affect retirement funds and personal savings for individuals who had no direct involvement with these companies. Musk's reputation, too, is at stake. The crash could tarnish his image, painting him as someone who took excessive risks. However, if he manages to recover and steer his companies back on track, his comeback could elevate his status, making him appear even more remarkable for overcoming such a significant setback. The electric vehicle industry is also likely to undergo changes. With Tesla struggling, competitors such as Ford, GM, and Volkswagen may seize the opportunity to expand their presence in the electric vehicle market. This shift could ultimately speed up the transition to electric vehicles as other companies vie for a larger share and push for innovation to make their products more affordable and advanced. Space exploration might face setbacks if SpaceX's operations significantly decline. NASA, in particular, has become heavily dependent on SpaceX for its missions. A disruption in SpaceX's operations could delay crucial space missions, including those to the Moon and Mars. Other private space companies might attempt to fill the gap, but they would be years behind SpaceX in terms of technology, making it a challenging task. The social media landscape could also change dramatically. If Musk faces financial difficulties, he may be forced to sell or significantly restructure X, formerly Twitter. Such a move could drastically alter the way millions of people interact online, reshaping the platforms that dominate public discourse. Neuralink too may experience delays. The company's progress in developing brain-computer interfaces, which could revolutionize medicine, might be set back due to the financial crisis. Necessary research and development could be hindered as funding becomes scarce, pushing back the timeline for medical breakthroughs that could help people with brain injuries or enhance human capabilities. In response to this crisis, governments may introduce new stress tests for tech companies, similar to the reforms implemented after the 2008 financial crisis. These tests would be designed to assess whether companies can withstand financial shocks without causing widespread damage, ensuring that they are better prepared for future crises. International cooperation could also see a shift, with the G7 potentially establishing permanent regulatory oversight for major tech firms. This could lead to the creation of consistent global standards for tech regulations, which might help prevent similar crises from happening in the future and create a more unified approach to managing the power of tech giants. Public trust in technology could be severely affected. If even the biggest and most successful tech companies can fail so spectacularly, people may become more cautious about embracing new technologies. This could lead to a more skeptical and cautious approach to innovation moving forward. The question of too big to fail will need to be reconsidered. If governments intervene to save Musk's companies, it will set a precedent for taxpayer-funded bailouts of tech billionaires. On the other hand, if the companies fail without government assistance, millions could lose jobs, and critical technologies could be lost, raising questions about the balance between free markets and the protection of public interests. As the world waits to see what steps the G7 will take, one question lingers. Will this crisis spark a fundamental shift in how we approach the power and influence of technology? With stakes this high, it's not just about Musk's fate, it's about how we navigate the balance between innovation, regulation, and the future of our global economy. What kind of world will emerge from this moment of disruption? The answers still unfolding will shape the course of the tech industry for generations to come.